All right, we're going to talk about the light reaction. These were covered in class. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Some of this is confusing, and so I want to make sure that we're kind of kicking on the same ground level. So the light reaction is going to take place in chloroplast, specifically on the thylakoid of the chloroplast itself. It does require light, and it also requires water. Water is going to be oxidized. Oxidation is loss of the electrons. The electrons are going to be used in this reaction to replace the ones that are going to be excited and produce oxygen. Okay, so that's kind of the light reaction. We'll divide it up into two stages. The products of this will then feed into the next stage, which is going to be the Calvin cycle or the light-independent reaction. And so basically this summarizes the light reaction. Water plus light on the thylakoid surface is going to produce ATP and NADPH and oxygen. I don't know why this is a little bit of a typo, why the H is down here. It should be up there. It's just a spacing thing, how this PowerPoint was converted into explain everything. Those things feed in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle then takes carbon dioxide to make sugar. Our focus today is going to be this. Do notice it is a cycle. What's produced here feeds into here. Then the products will go back into the light reaction to make more, and so on. Light reaction, light, water, oxygen's produced, and we make ATP and NADPH that are used in the Calvin cycle. Notice, no sugar is made in the light reaction. That's going to be saved for this stage over here, which we'll talk about in class. The notes over this section were covered on October 8th and 9th during class. So there's two approaches to doing this. As you recall, they both require photosystems. We got photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. Photosystem 1 was named first. It was discovered first. Photosystem 2 was discovered second. But photosystem 2 is actually going to be the first functioning photosystem. The fact that it's a photosystem means that it has a lot of proteins and different things that come together as a system to get the job done. When we do the non-cyclic electron flow, it's the primary way it's done, and basically both photosystems are used. Photosystem 2 is used first, photosystem 1 is used second, and we make ATP and NADPH. ATP would be comparable to like cash. NADPH is more comparable to like a savings account where we can store that energy, the energy of that elevated electron for later use, basically to make sugar. And so, how does this occur? Happens on the thylakoid again. Light's going to come in, and an electron is going to be excited. It's going to bounce around until it gets to the activation area, where the wavelength of light of 680 nanometers shoots up the electron to a higher state. So it has gained energy, has more potential energy up there at that elevated state. Down here, we've lost an electron. So one of the first things we have to do is to replace that electron that's been excited, because it's going to move along the pathway. And water is what actually comes by and does that. Water is going to be oxidized. Oxidation is loss. And in the process, water is going to have those two electrons that are donated. As the end product, we're going to produce oxygen and some protons, some H+, that'll be made during the photosystem. So electron gets excited. We replace those from water. Oxygen, once again, is a byproduct. It's not what we're trying to make. It's just a product that's produced. What's key is this electron's been excited, and we got to get the energy out of that. As that electron starts to go back down, it's going to go through the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is a series of proteins and different compounds that will, as the electron goes back through, similar to like water going through a turbine, it'll spin the turbine producing ATP. So after photosystem 2, that excited electron falls back down and it goes through the electron transport chain making ATP. ATP is like cash for the cell. It's going to be needed to power the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is an ATP-hungry reaction, meaning it needs a lot of it. Now, as that electron's going back down, it wants to get back to that stable energy level. Before it does, it gets hit with another photon of energy in the wavelength of 700 nanometers, again exciting the electron. So, light hits, electron goes up, water supplants the more electrons so that it can happen again. As this electron that's excited starts to go back down, goes through the electron transport chain to make ATP. Before it gets all the way down, it's shot up again. And now what we're going to do, instead of making ATP, we're going to make NADPH. We're going to send it through and make NADPH, which is an electron carrier, which is like a savings account that can be converted into cash at a later date. Okay, so two photons of energy have been used, shooting electrons up twice. Once, the first time, then photosystem 2 makes this ATP. Second time makes NADPH. Both photosystems are used. Photosystem 2 is used first. Photosystem 1 is used second. I love this diagram. It kind of shows it here on the analogy. So that first photon shoots up the energy level here at the activation site at 680 nanometers. It is up here at this higher spot. As it goes down the electron transport chain, so my notes say electron transport chain, the energy that's created as it goes back down generates ATP. Before it gets all the way back down to the stable ground state, it gets hit with another photon of light, shooting it up an energy level where we capture it into a electron carrier called NADPH. NADPH will then carry the energy of that molecule over into the Calvin cycle, where it's eventually going to be converted into sucrose that can be exported out of the cell and used by the plant as an energy source. Okay, so make sure you understand that, which photosystem happens first, which one happens second. First one, the photosystem 2 makes ATP, photosystem 1, NADPH. All right, so that's the non-cyclic. The cyclic electron flow is only going to use photosystem 1 and will only make ATP. The reason why this is necessary is that the Calvin cycle is an extremely hungry reaction that requires a lot of ATP in order to work. And so in order to satisfy that ATP, we also at times will do the cyclic electron flow. The analogy I make is when I get a paycheck, I put some of my money into savings, some of it into straight cash. When something happens, like my car's broke down or if there's some unforeseen medical bills, instead of putting money into savings, I go all into cash to pay off those debts. So the cell will do that as well. The chloroplast will do that as well. When it needs to, the debts start getting low, the cash gets low, we need to produce more cash, we'll actually just do the cyclic, build up some cash flow in the form of ATP so that we can run the Calvin cycle. Once that ATP number goes up, we'll go back to doing the non-cyclic. So it'll kind of alternate between the two. All right, so if we do need to just make ATP because we're a little bit ATP in debt, what we're going to do is only do the photosystem 1, and we're going to do it in what we call the cyclic cycle. So what happens is, same thing, electron gets excited, goes up here, it goes down, makes ATP. Once again, gets hit with another photon of light, goes up to here, but instead of going this path, it's going to get us NADPH, it gets dumped back into the electron transport chain. In doing so, it's going to go down here, make ATP, get hit with an electron, get dumped back, make some ATP, go down here, get hit with an electron, and it's just going to stay in photosystem 1. And it's a cycle going round and round and round, generating only ATP, only cash. What's that do? It's going to build a surplus of ATP necessary to use the Calvin cycle. So cyclic and non-cyclic, they alter. Typically, we'll do the non because it's going to make us NADPH that can be used to make sugars. But when every once in a while the ATP is low, we will kick into the cyclic, which only is going to kick into the photosystem 1. What's confusing is it says it only uses photosystem 1. Remember, these alternate. So what's happening is we're doing this, the non-cyclic, and all of a sudden we start getting low on ATP, and we'll just go, uh-oh, we're low. That's when we kick in, and that's when it stays only in the photosystem 1. All right, and as a result of this process, the light reaction, the cyclic and non-cyclic, what have we done? We've taken light energy, excited an electron. That electron then goes through the electron transport chain to make ATP, gets hit with another photon of light. It goes down, makes NADPH. The electrons need to be replaced of that excited electron. That's where water comes in. Water is oxidized, producing a waste product or a end product of oxygen that is released by the chloroplast. The products of this, ATP and NADPH, will then be fed into the Calvin cycle, and it's at that point that we're going to make our sugars that are necessary for the plant to ship around the entire cell. At times, because the Calvin cycle is going to require so much ATP, 18 to be exact, we get into a situation where we're at ATP debt, And in those cases, that's where the cyclic version will come into play to be used. Guys, I hope this helped you. It's just a little extra notes if this was confusing to you in class.